How's it going, everyone? There appears to be a paradox in Canadian polling, specifically with regards to the age groups or generations of those polled on their political views. We have the baby boomers and Gen Z teaming up against the millennials, with baby boomers and Gen Z being more liberal and millennials being more conservative. Now we're going to talk about why this is generally unusual, but we're also going to talk about the unique history of Canadian politics, which will then unfold this paradox and show us that it actually makes sense. And we're going to look at three polls. We're going to look at Abacus data, we're going to look at Angus Reid, and we are going to look at Ledger. All three of these are pretty respected, successful, relatively accurate Canadian pollsters. So let's get into it. And all of these polls, by the way, are from late November. So we start with Abacus data, where we see liberals and conservatives neck and neck. That is not surprising because earlier this year, Canada had an election which was pretty close, although liberals did end up ahead and won a minority government. When we look at the regional breakdown, no surprises. In Atlantic Canada and Quebec, the Liberals are ahead of the Conservatives as usual. In Ontario and British Columbia, Liberals and Conservatives are neck and neck, which is pretty typical. Ontario and British Columbia are kind of like the swing states, if you use American terminology, the swing provinces, so to speak, in Canada. And then we have Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, where the Conservatives are ahead as usual. When we look at the male versus female breakdown, again, nothing surprising. Females tend to be a bit more pro-liberal and males tend to be a bit more pro-conservative. It is the age data where things start to look weird. Okay, so here's what we see. 18 to 29-year-olds tied between liberals and conservatives. 30 to 44-year-olds Conservatives with a clear lead, 44% versus 36% with the Liberals. 45 to 59-year-olds, once again neck and neck between Liberals and Conservatives. And 60 plus, we have Liberals ahead quite a bit, 47% Liberal to 37% Conservative. So, why is this strange? Well, usually in political polling, younger people tend to be more left-wing, and older people tend to be more right-wing. And that makes sense because for younger people, it's easier to imagine a situation where there is a powerful authority figure that provides for everyone and cares for everybody. That is what parents do to their children. And so for younger voters, well, that makes sense as a system that could work well. For older voters, it starts to make less sense because, well, your parents love you, you can trust them. But for older people, how they think about the government, they think, well, I'd rather trust myself to manage my own money. I don't want to trust some other authority figure to manage things for me. And so you end up with older people being more conservative. It's also easier for older people to imagine being able to provide for themselves and their family, whereas younger people tend to have less money, more difficult to be able to imagine providing for themselves and a family. Older people have also figured out how to do that more so. So that's what you typically see. Younger people more left-wing, older people more right-wing. And it seems to begin that way, right? With things being neck and neck for 18 to 29-year-olds, but then conservatives gain popularity for the older people, 30 to 44 years old. Where it gets stranger is when you look at the next older age group, the conservatives aren't getting even more popular. They start to get less popular again with a tie. 45 to 59-year-olds are tied, liberals versus conservatives. And then the oldest age group are actually the most pro-liberal group. 60 plus years old is a clear pro-liberal support there. Now, this becomes even more obvious, this difference, when we look at the other pollsters. Let's look at Angus Reid. So Angus Reid shows the Liberals a bit ahead of the Conservatives. Again, not surprising because Liberals did win the most recent election. We see regionally, Atlantic Canada and Quebec are more pro-Liberal. Interestingly enough, they show Ontario as being pretty pro-liberal too, which is quite a big difference, 39 to 48. Maybe they're oversampling liberal voters in Ontario. And then we see Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia being all pro-conservative. Maybe they're oversampling conservative voters in British Columbia. And so on average, it ends up okay. And so liberals and conservatives are pretty close to 50-50 overall. So that's interesting. You have two sampling errors that average out to things being more accurate. And that sometimes happens in statistics, and it's funny when it does. The breakdown as male versus female, again, no surprises. Females tend to be a bit more pro-liberal, and males tend to be a bit more pro-conservative. Not really a bit more, they're clearly more pro-liberal on the female side, more pro-conservative on the male side here. But again, look what happens when we get to the breakdown by age. 18 to 34-year-olds, a little bit more pro-liberal, although it's almost a tie, pretty much a tie. I think that's within uncertainty. 35 to 54-year-olds, more pro-conservative, and then 55 plus, more pro-liberal again. The first part, nothing surprising there. Younger people tend to be more pro-liberal. As people get older, they tend to get more pro-conservative. But then what is going on with the oldest age group being more pro-liberal again? That's the mystery. That's the paradox, right? It's not what you typically see in Canadian polling, or in political polling, sorry, I should say. Not what you typically see in political polling. Now look at Ledger. Again, we see liberals ahead of conservatives, not a tie. I think Ledger is oversampling liberal voters here, because look what's going on here. It's not really that close. 36 for conservatives versus 43% for liberals. The regional data, Atlantic Canada, Quebec, yes, liberals are ahead of conservatives. Look at Ontario. Liberals are, again, way ahead of conservatives. Pretty much neck and neck in British Columbia. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, conservatives are ahead as usual. It looks like they're oversampling liberal voters in Ontario. Look at male versus female voters. They are both pro-liberal. Okay? It makes me think, again, it's the oversampled liberal voters in Ontario contributing to increasing the overall male liberal calculation right here. But, again, look at what's going on with age. 18 to 34-year-olds, liberals are a little bit ahead of conservatives. That's probably within uncertainty, so it's pretty much a tie. As people get older, 35 to 54-year-olds, conservatives pull ahead. But as people get even more older, conservatives are not pulling ahead more. It's actually the liberals who pull ahead and have 52% support versus 31% support for conservatives. Okay? So whichever one of these polls you look at, that is what they agree on. For the youngest age group, it's pretty much a tie. For a step above them, conservatives are pulling ahead and are in the lead, but then as people get older, support for conservatives drops, and for the oldest group, liberal support is actually way ahead of conservative support. We see that for all of these polls, right? Pretty much a tie for 18 to 34, conservatives ahead 35 to 54, liberals ahead 55 plus. Okay, and the last one we looked at, pretty much a tie, 18 to 34, conservatives pull ahead 35 to 54, but liberals are way ahead for 55 plus. So what is going on? Why don't we see this high support for the left wing among the youth that drops as people get older? Well, here's the thing. You actually do see that. Okay? It's hidden. Okay? Let me show you something. Let me show you the NDP. Okay, now NDP is a farther left-wing party than the Liberals. So, based on the Abacus data results, NDP for the youngest age group is 10% support. One step older drops to 9%. Next step older drops to 7%. Next step older drops to 5%. Support for the farthest left-wing party in Canadian politics is highest for the youngest group and drops lower and lower and lower as people get older. Look at the Angus Reid. Same thing. Youngest group, 23% support NDP. Next age group, 12%. Oldest age group, 4%. Let's look at the Ledger data. Youngest age group, 12% support NDP. Next age group drops to 10%. Oldest age group drops to 4%. So we do see, as expected, a drop in support for the most left-wing party as people get older, or an increase in support for the most left-wing party as you look at younger age brackets. So this phenomena is happening in Canada. So what is going on with the oldest age group having so much support for the Liberals? What's going on is the unique history of the Liberal Party. See, Canada is not a two-party system. You have the right-wing Conservatives, you have the left-wing NDP, and you have the left-wing Liberals. So what's going on with these two left-wing parties, the Liberals and the NDP, which stands for New Democratic Party to those watching from the United States? Well, it used to be that Conservatives were the right-wing party, Liberals were a center-left party, and NDP was the farther left-wing party. That's how it was in the 90s, early 2000s. But then things changed throughout the 2000s and leading up to Trudeau and under Trudeau, where the Liberal Party started to drift much more left-wing and stopped being a center-left party. Some described it as a far-left party. Some described it as just a left-wing party, but not centrist. And the Conservatives and NDP moved to the left as well. Conservatives, before they were called the right-wing party, now they're typically described as a center-right party. And NDP is considered more far-left than they were in the 90s and early 2000s as well. So, whereas longer ago, Liberals were seen as center-left, under Trudeau, they became seen as more farther left-wing. Whereas Conservatives are now seen as more center-right. That's what happened under Trudeau. And the Liberal Party lost a lot of popularity as a result, and leading up to the election, Conservatives were actually expected to win a huge majority. But then the Liberals changed their leader from Trudeau to Carney. And the way the new leadership was being described was that they are going to move to the center. Now, some people believed them, some people didn't believe them, but enough people believed them that Liberals did end up coming back and winning a minority government. So, the big question in Canadian politics is, are the Liberals becoming a center-left party again under Carney, or are they still a farther left-wing party like they became under Trudeau? That is the debate. And what people think about that, well, that likely depends on age. Because if you look at the oldest age group among Canadians, well, they were around long enough to see Liberals as a center-left party for a long time. So for them, a center-left Liberal Party is the norm, and Trudeau is the exception. So they're more likely to think that, yeah, Liberals are center-left, and they'll vote Liberal. They're also more likely to see the Conservatives as more of a just right-wing party rather than a centrist or center-right party, because again, they've been around long enough to see the Conservatives as how they were before, okay? When they weren't considered center-right, when they were just considered right-wing. So in the eyes of those Canadians who are older, well, they're more likely to see the Conservatives as right-wing and the Liberals as center-left, and those of them who are centrist, or the swing voters, so to speak, would lean more liberal in that regard. Now, what about the younger Canadians? Well, for younger Canadians, and here I mean millennials, well, their political awareness and a more detailed understanding of politics probably started somewhere around the Harper years, or when Harper almost came to power. Harper was the Conservative Prime Minister before Trudeau. So in their experience, the Liberal Party, in their adult experience, the Liberal Party is Trudeau. Okay, the Liberal Party is not a center-left party. It's either just like a left party or a far-left party, depending on what their views are. Whereas the Conservatives they're familiar with are a center right-wing party. So those of them who are more centrist are more likely to lean conservatives because they view it more as a choice between a center-right party or a not centrist left-wing party. As for the youngest age group, the Gen Z, well, to them, the Liberal Party is also Trudeau, but they are younger, they are more pro-left wing, so if they're given a choice between center-right and non-centrist left, well, they support the left. They're younger, they like the left wing more. And that's what we see. We see it either being a tie or Liberals a little bit ahead among Gen Z, and then as people get older, among millennials, we see the conservatives pull ahead because left-wing ideas are becoming less popular. And then amongst the oldest age group, well, they're not voting for liberals because they think liberals are left or far left. No, they're more likely to view the liberals as a centrist or center-left party, something between the NDP and the conservatives. They're less likely to view the conservatives as a centrist or center-right party. So it's not that the older group is supporting the left wing more, it's that they're supporting centrists more and supporting the left wing less, as we see with the lowest support for the NDP, but they view the liberals as more centrist or center-left. And that is what's going on. What would be interesting is to look at Canadians who are in the older age group, but who were not born in Canada. Because if they arrived to Canada around the Harper years or just before the Harper years, well then, even during the Chrétien years, maybe because they don't have as long of a history of viewing the Liberal Party as being center-left, maybe they would actually tend to look more like millennials because their experience of Canadian politics looks more like that of millennials, and maybe Canadian immigrants who are in the 55 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus age group would actually lean more conservative as well. That would be some interesting data to look at, and maybe we will do that later on. So I hope you enjoyed working through this paradox, which turns out not to be a paradox at all, and I'll see you next time.